right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's Security Info Watch exclusive live web event. Today, we're going to be talking about trends in workplace violence and active shooter strategies to mitigate threats. We want to thank Omnilert for being our sponsor today, and look forward to talking to Eric as one of our expert panelists here. As you all know, workplace violence and active shooter threats are rising across all sectors, making prevention and preparedness a top priority. Our expert panel today will be focused on discussing the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to reduce risk and enhance response readiness. This live web event will provide practical guidance on identifying behavioral warning signs and implementing effective prevention programs and utilizing emerging tools to improve workplace safety. Whether you operate in healthcare, education, or corporate or critical infrastructure environments, this event will provide some actionable insights to help you protect your people and build a resilient safety culture. Some of the things we may talk about today are going to be the latest workplace violence trends and statistics shaping threat management, identifying behavioral warning signs and intervention strategies before escalation, crafting and implementing a workplace violence prevention and response program, leveraging advanced security technologies to mitigate threats, and critical steps for recovery and legal compliance. Hi, I'm Steve Lasky. I will be your moderator today. I am the editorial director for Endeavor Business Media's security group, which includes SecurityInfoWatch, our Security DNA podcasts, our SIW YouTube page, our magazines, Security Business, Security Executive, and Locksmith Ledger. Again, I want to thank Omnilert for making this possible today. This presentation is live and interactive, allowing you to ask questions at any time via the Ask a Question box in the presentation window. We will answer as many of these questions as possible during the Q&A portion of this webcast. And we do really want to make this interactive as possible, so I would encourage you all to ask questions throughout the event. If you encounter any technical difficulties during the webinar, please type your issue into the Ask a Question box, and a member of our technical team will assist you. If you run a pop-up blocking software, you need to disable it to view the webinar. Additionally, it is recommended that you close all other applications for optimal performance. For your convenience, this presentation will be available for on-demand viewing within 24 hours of this live event. All registrants will receive a reminder email containing a link to the presentation, which will also be accessible from the SIW's homepage. Again, we do encourage you to ask questions at any time during the event using the Q&A tool on the left side of your screen. If we can't answer all the questions we get during this web chat, our experts will do our best to contact you all via email and answer them then. Just as a reminder, you may qualify for CEU credits following this web event. If you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's event, please remain logged on for the webinar. You will automatically receive your certificate via email within 24 hours. Following the webinar, you will be responsible for checking with your association or your organization to verify that this event met its criteria for certification. Finally, today's webinar, including the audio, will be archived on our site for 6 months. So with all the housekeeping issues out of the way, I'm going to take a sip of water and introduce our guests. All right. So with us to my bottom left is Lisa Terry. Lisa is a CPP, CPD, and a senior consultant for Vizient. Lisa has extensive experience leading healthcare security, law enforcement, safety, and emergency management programs. Before joining Vizient, she served as a chief development officer for Vistellar, conflict management training, and vice president of healthcare for Allied Universal. After beginning her career as a police officer with the Raleigh Police Department, Lisa served as the chief of campus police and public safety with WakeMed Health and Hospitals in Raleigh, North Carolina. She also served as chief of police and public safety with Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk and director of hospital police and transportation at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Lisa shares her knowledge, strategies, and lessons learned for successfully mitigating violence in her books, Preventing Violence in the Emergency Department and the Active Shooter Response Toolkit for Healthcare Workers. She is also certified. She's also a certified CHPA, CPP, and CPD. Our next guest is Gerald Wilkins. Gerald is to my immediate left. I hope it's left and not right. I can't tell on the screen. Jerry is a graduate of the FBI Citizens Academy and an NRI certified firearms instructor, a refused to be a victim instructor, and an NRA range safety officer, a licensed firearm instructor for the state of Maryland, a certified rescue task force operator in technical emergency casualty care, and a certified ICS 339 division group supervisor, and holds both an NFPA 3000 active shooter, hostile event response program specialist certification, and an IAHSS advanced training certificate. Jerry is a licensed private investigator in Maryland. He owns and serves as president and CEO of Wilkins Investigative Group and Security Product Marketing, and is co-owner and vice president of the Active Risk Survival Inc., ARS. And finally, we have our sponsored guest here, which is Eric Polovich. Eric is the director of sales operation at Omnilert and has over 15 years of experience in safety technology deployments and more than 20 years in SaaS solutions. He has played a key role in implementing emergency communication platforms and is a subject matter expert on Omnialert's gun detect. So let's get our questions started here. And I'm going to throw this out to Lisa first, but I want everybody else to kind of chime in and jump in. So, we're talking about trend awareness and understanding, where current workplace violence is. And when you do that, you got to consider some of the data that's out there, Lisa. With your research, and I know you are big into research for your speaking engagements and for your editorial work, what do recent statistics reveal about the rise of workplace violence and active shooter incidents domestically?
Well, thank you for asking. I will tell you that, as we probably all know, just episodically, workplace violence incidents have been on the rise and are definitely on the rise. Oddly, the FBI found that last year, for 2024, they had a 50% decrease in active shooter incidents. For instance, I think there was 24 events in 2024, and there were 48 events in 2023. Now, that's not a trend, but I mean, it's a good statistic to hold on to for whatever reason. I know that some of the other trends, there's more and more of the shooters are becoming females. I think in 2024, of those 22 or 24 shooters, 25 shooters, there's, I guess 22 were male and 3 were female. And in 23, there was 48 shooters. All of those were male and only 1 female. So even though the numbers are going down, we've definitely seen a little bit of a shift into that. And then most of the time we're seeing that there's a connection between the shooter and at least one individual that has either shot or has been identified. So that's still kind of a trend that continues.
Eric, what are you seeing, with your group? You guys are a solutions provider, and I know you've got to study the statistics just to be able to, address that with how you go to market.
Sure, absolutely. I think that, when we look specifically at that FBI study, the small number of active shooter events really comes down to how the FBI defines an active shooter situation. So it sounds exceptionally small, but there were still over 500 mass shooting events in 2024. If you look at the Gun Violence Archive, for example, they track gun violence across the spectrum, not just what is defined as an active shooter event. So these numbers are still extremely high. The trends have been going upward year over year for the last decade. And we did see a little bit of a respite in 2024, but the numbers are still astronomical compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago. So we really look at these trends being about the changing landscape and the evolving nature of gun violence in the workplace, in public spaces, and using new technologies to really combat them, confront them, and try to
Right.
minimize and mitigate.
Gary, what do attribute this staggering rise in we've been seeing a rise in workplace violence per se, but this use in gun violence in the workplace, and especially it's no longer limited to isolated disputes and between individuals. It's taking on a more targeted mass violent approach now, and understanding these changing threats is crucial. What are you seeing that is different from when you were just sort of doing the the one on employee to disgruntled employee threats?
Well, we've seen workplace violence really evolve. Gun violence in the workplace is growing. The only difference between a workplace violence event and an active shooter event really comes down to body count. How many people actually got killed? And it's got to be 4 to be classified as an active shooter event. But we are seeing more weapons being used in workplace violence events leading to death. Interestingly enough, the leading cause of death for women in the workplace is homicide.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's staggering. Lisa, what do you have to say about that? And also I found it interesting in your opening remark that you were kind of shocked, and it shocked me that we're seeing more women involved in workplace violence in using a weapon and a firearm.
Well, and I think absolutely women are either feeling more emboldened, or they're out beginning to use their firearms. They're taking the classes or not taking classes. But I think one thing that I can say, having been in healthcare for a large number of years, is women have been victims of workplace violence, either domestically or for other reasons, for a long time. And I think that probably it's coming more to the light because in my days working at the hospital, many of those women did not want to actually report that. They were embarrassed about being a victim. So now we're probably getting better data. I think it's happening more, but we're probably getting better data because they're actually more comfortable reporting those things.
Eric, when you're considering organizations' approach to this, I mean, there's two ways you can look at it, and this goes to mitigating any type of risk. You can be proactive in addressing that problem, or you can be reactive. Unfortunately, it seems many organizations are reactive. So, in your opinion, and I want all three of your opinions, but I'm going to let Eric kick this off. How can organizations shift from this reactive posture to a proactive approach in closing the response gap between active shooter incidents and common workplace violence incidents?
I think we're starting to see a shift across the board. When I started talking to people about these sorts of incidents years ago, we often heard well, we're not doing anything right now because it can't happen here. I live in a safe neighborhood. We need to shift from it can't happen here to we need to be ready when it does. And organizations that are relying on just after incident response are already at a disadvantage. By the time a shot's fired, lives can be lost. And not to toot our own horn, but that's why we use Omnilert Gun Detect, which is a visual detection method to see guns before a shot's fired. Shifting to those sorts of technologies, whether it's a visual analytic, whether it's an advanced walkthrough device, whether it's just shifting in perspective from a reactive to a proactive posture, believing that you need to be ready, having that big black binder over your shelf that has all of your different emergency response plans in it, practicing them, drilling them, and really being ready to move forward with them. I think is probably the biggest change. That mindset of going proactive rather than reactive, and it's in and of itself is the first step.
And you bring up a good point too, because I don't think enough people really put enough validity into the importance of response time and being a critical factor in saving lives. But that's just not a technology thing. It's got to be a policy, procedure, and a technology thing. And how do you make all those work together?
Well, I think if we look at numbers, proactive posture is not limited to, but it certainly involves identifying threats in real time and reacting in a planned manner. Having procedures for enabling rapid lockdowns, pushing out notifications, first responder engagement in advance of when the situation escalates is super important. Average incident duration for an active shooter situation somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes right now. That's the lethal window. And based on all those statistics, there's usually time before an incident escalates that you can take advantage of, that you can intervene to stop or at least mitigate the violence that's done. I think that proactive posture is the biggest part of it.
Jerry, when you're dealing, because you've got so much background in this, both as a practitioner and and in a consultative way, when you're dealing with proactive versus reactive, how do you go into an organization where you might realize there's a problem with the culture and try to go in there and help them understand what they need to do to, again, number one, understand risk and put programs in to mitigate that and make it a consistent policy approach?
The primary way that we get that discussion open to where it's meaningful is discuss the risk associated with a workplace violence event or the risk associated with an active shooter event. I don't classify an active shooter or workplace violence as a risk. It's a threat. And it's become a highly visible threat over the last few years. The term going postal came about in the late 80s because of the Postal Service having some workplace violence issues.
Sure.
But what started to happen now, and we've seen this in articles over the last couple of years, is the liability associated with it. When you think about anybody, and the comment that was made about it can't happen here, that's one that just drives me nuts because it's a true statement until it does, and it will at some point. But understanding that the liability for not having a plan in place and not thinking it through is so intense. When you look at negligence, it's nothing but, did you have a duty? Did you fail that duty? And was that duty failure the proximate cause to the injuries or damage? And anybody that would say now that workplace violence or active shooter is not a real threat, I mean, even FEMA, in their 32 threat categories, 2 of the categories have to do with violence in the workplace. So getting people to understand, you may have never had it happen before that you know of. And that's the key, because when you look at workplace violence in general, it's not just somebody walking in and shooting at somebody or 2 employees getting in a knockdown drag out. It could be something as what would appear to be benign is verbal abuse. If someone takes issue with that verbal abuse and has an issue with that verbal abuse, guess what? If you don't have a plan that's all encompassing, how's it reported? How are people trained? There's some great guidance available from OSHA, but if you don't have a proper plan, you might as well just figure on settling for at least $500,000. The stats are there on what these cases cost, to multiple millions if it actually litigates and you get in front of a jury. So driving home that there is liability, when you look at risk, the definition of risk is outcome and probability. Well, there's only 2 types of outcomes. There's good ones, which you're not going to think twice about, and then there's bad ones. well, it's going to be a bad outcome associated. It could be anything from the business integrity to share value loss to loss of employees. The immediate impact could be days where the facility has to be closed. So trying to bring into the conversation the financial cost as part of the risk equation, to me, is just so critical. And we're seeing it. The ABA said that, if you have a workplace violence event, you're going to get sued. It's just that simple. There was a great article in one of the publications where it talked about, it was a law firm talking that they love to chase cases where there's no security planning in place. The folks that take the ostrich head in the sand approach, they're easy pickings because this is a foreseeable event that could occur. And a reasonable man, if they had a foreseeable event, would take steps to protect against that.
Lisa, let me, that kind of segues into my next question. And you being the lone practitioner here who's had, just a vast amount of experience in what now is, one of the most dangerous workplace environments in the world is the healthcare industry, which is just hard to believe. How do you go about, we want to talk about early detection and recognizing some of these warning signals. What behavioral indicators often precede incidents of workplace violence? And, and if you can play off of some of your experience in the healthcare environment, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I think I did want to really kind of say that it's so important that there's a layered approach. There's no easy answer. And I think we talk about all the policies, all the training, the culture, and then all of these other digital, physical technology that's absolutely got to be in place. I think obviously the aggressive behaviors, acting out behaviors, things of that nature. And I think what I've learned in healthcare is people react, meaning not just patients, but even employees, to how they're treated. So I feel like first and foremost, what I have seen work is when leaders start to build a culture that it models respectful behaviors and they're inconsistent with any type of physical or emotional violence. I had a colleague tell me once that the room either gets physically and emotionally safer when you walk in, or it gets less safe. And I think with patients, there was in February, there was a shooting at a hospital in Pennsylvania where the gentleman had a conversation that did not turn out well with some of the employees in the intensive care unit. It wasn't about him. It was about a loved one. Right. He went in, took them hostage, and he had it planned who he was going to shoot and what he was going to do. So I think, those are the kinds of things that you see. And the other thing that I've seen is when people are held accountable, but not necessarily in a respectful or dignified manner, they may start to act as if, I'm talking about employees more from that lateral violence, they may all of a sudden change that behavior so that it's more positive, and it becomes very positive. That's another behavior of concern. We've if you know anything about Captain Katie Ann Ballard, she was actually set on fire because an individual she was trying to hold accountable, doing the best she could, he started acting great and wonderful for 2 weeks, and then came in and when her guard was probably a little more down, set her on fire. So it happens, and I think there's a little bit of everything. I know I've kind of touched on a whole lot. I think we all know those behaviors of concern, but they really go across the whole continuum.
And it's interesting too, and Jerry and I go back a while, but I'm going to direct this at Eric, and Jerry, I want you to jump in. But that the buzzword of duty of care is something that we really see discussed, but maybe not really understood in a workplace environment. So, and it's, Eric, as you kind of explained, duty of care kind of sits in that intersection of risk mitigation, compliance, and organizational accountability. but it really just means implementing strategies that go beyond after the fact responses. So my question to you, being a technology solutions provider, how does duty of care come into play when you're deciding to invest in technologies like AI gun detection? And what are the legal risks of doing nothing? And then, Jerry, I'm going to throw it back at you.
Sure. I mean, duty of care requires organizations to take, I think the term, reasonable and responsible actions to protect people on their premises from foreseeable harm. For example, I live in Buffalo, New York. Duty of care here means in the winter, it's snow removal, ice removal, somebody falls down, potentially dangerous situation.
Correct.
Firearm violence is now a significant foreseeable risk. We, saw how this could be addressed in the 20th century with how public schools looked at the problem of school fires. Dozens of fires claimed hundreds of lives in the first half of the last century, and it was proactive action, implementing fire drills, installing alarms, installing sprinklers, redesigning building codes. And that reduced the risk and impact of fire, so much so that fatalities due to school fires in the last 50 years are virtually zero.
Right.
New technologies, AI gun detection, integrated notification systems, integration with quick responses like access control, alarm panels. Organizations need to demonstrate that they're taking preemptive steps rather than reacting after a tragedy strikes, because failure to adopt these sorts of tools, especially when they're now readily available and more commonplace, could potentially be viewed as negligence in a post-incident legal or compliance context. I'm not saying that they are as of yet, but we're getting to the point where ignoring these commonplace tactics could be detrimental.
Most definitely. Jerry, you and I have talked about duty of care. You've written some articles for us on this, but from your perspective, what does duty of care mean to you in this environment?
Well, it doesn't so much matter what it means to me. What matters is what does it mean to OSHA?
Right.
If we look at the general duty clause, 5.A.1, says each employer shall provide a facility free of recognized hazards that may cause injury or death. And it is a citable offense under the CFRs. So OSHA has said, hey, you've got to do what you need to do to recognize potential issues within your facility that may impact the safety or the life of your employees. So when we start to think about that aspect of it, that came out in 1970. Now, when that came out in 1970, it was, are your employees wearing steel-toed shoes? Are your employees wearing hard hats? Because not that there wasn't active or workplace violence events occurring before 1970, but they had no visibility. But now they have visibility. There's actually a statute in the CFRs under OSHA 1910-338A. If you've got 10 or more employees, you must have a written, they call it EAP, Emergency Action Plan, to deal with the potential threats within your business. Now, what's happened is there's not a lot of lawyers yet, and it's coming, and I've been saying this for 10 years, when the lawyers will actually understand there's all kinds of best practice that has been reduced to writing. When we're talking healthcare, it's OSHA 3148. When we're talking late night retail, it's OSHA 3153. These are paper tigers if you're in those industries and haven't followed. They're not laws, they're recommendations that if you don't follow, you run the risk of the general duty citation. Now, let's say you have a workplace violence event that leads to death. Worst case, you're going to get fined $14,200, and you're going to pay that fine because it's the federal government that's fined you. But what have you also just done? Well, you've just acknowledged that you failed to maintain a safe and secure workplace free of recognized hazards that may cause injury or death. So it opens your liability komodo just dramatically. The Wall Street Journal published an article a couple years ago where they said major corporations are now putting in their corporate guidance the impact that an active shooter or workplace violence event could have on their share price. Now, if you're notifying your shareholders that these events could occur, what had you better be doing inside your facility? Planning for those events. And, all of the technology out there is great, but if it's not part of a comprehensive response plan, and when you look at a properly done EOP, it has threat-specific annexes, which are basically workflows of what would we do if this event occurred. Well, if you don't follow that, that's a problem. And if technology is not written into that workflow, I can 100% guarantee you it won't be used. So having all this technology, but not developing plans around the technology. The question we ask, and this always gets people to turn their head like a puppy, but how do you currently resource type electronic countermeasures as part of your critical incident all hazard response plan? How are you using your gun detection? How are you using your video? How are you using your access control to keep you right at boom, but especially if you go right at boom? How are we going to use all that, to detect, deter, and then defend? How are we going to turn that technology into an advantage for us rather than just something there to record how bad a job we did and get us, further down in the mud with the litigation?
Great point. And Lisa, we're going to touch on this. I want to start with Lisa and then go to you, Eric. When we're talking about technology solutions and enhancing detection and communication options, Lisa, again, in your role as a practitioner in the healthcare industry and now as a consultant, in your view, how can technology improve workplace violence detection and ultimately, communication, because communication is probably the big piece of the puzzle that can help deter?
So I think any of the tools that, for instance, the AI-powered surveillance, the panic alert systems, and mass notification, having, again, I talk about layers, making sure you've got all of those, is going to enhance that early detection. But I feel like something that I've been learning of late that's so important is what type of prompts are we feeding to any of our AI systems, and really learning and becoming more savvy with those prompts so that it's continuously going out and checking things that it's never checked before, and it becomes smarter and smarter and provides more and more information. For instance, what does that individual look like? What's he driving? What's out there? Is there the ability to pull that in? Same thing with the weapons detection. The more that you feed in there, the more prompts that you learn how to feed in, the better that technology becomes at detecting those weapons, regardless of whether they're firearms or whatever is coming into your organization. So again, none of the technology is worth anything if you do not have individuals who've been trained and are willing to continue to learn and get better and better and better with that technology.
Eric, when we're talking about using technology and putting together security strategies, the most basic premise is a layered defense. But we see a lot of organizations that throw a lot of disparate pieces of technology up against the wall and hope it works, and they don't really integrate it. So, from your perspective, again, as a solutions provider, what does a truly layered defense look like, and how can you take tools like gun detection, mass notification, and access control and put it together in a seamless solution so it works for the client, not against him?
Yeah, I mean, a truly layered defense doesn't just mean that you have multiple security tools. It means having those tools working together in real time. Most organizations that are out there, they already have surveillance, access control, communication platform, but they don't integrate. And without integration, these systems act in isolation. And we learned, 20 years ago at Omnilert, when we started working in mass communications and mass notification, that having all of these siloed systems leads to delays. Precious seconds are lost during a crisis. We started talking years ago about the most important minute, that first 60 seconds of an emergency situation, where you kind of set the stage. You push that first domino on your emergency response. And if all those dominoes aren't lined up, if you don't have that plan, that comprehensive, what are we going to do? Your entire response is sort of slapdash. Making sure that you have a plan, that it's integrated with your technology, and that you can start that minute as soon as possible is really key. That's why we talk a lot about early detection, using tools like visual gun detection to see the gun before an incident escalates, and then having that detection kick off your planned, regimented, integrated response, alerting people, bringing in law enforcement, locking doors, raising the alarm. It's a unified response that's important.
So Lisa, throwing it back to you, and then Jerry, I'm going to have you pitch in on this too. Okay, so we talked technology, but as Eric just said, having the prevention program and building that comprehensive approach towards mitigating risk is important. So, Lisa, in your experience, what components do you need to have in place for a workplace violence prevention program to work? And citing some use cases and some best practices.
So, I actually learned a lot after Virginia Tech, and probably the one thing that I started implementing was a threat assessment, threat management program, a threat assessment team, one that's a standing team that meets, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, whatever your regimen is, but really having the right people on that interdisciplinary team, making sure that that all the minutes are protected, that it's a very confidential group, and that all that information it's not siloed as it was in Virginia Tech. We all heard about after the fact how this person knew this person knew that, but nobody had all the information. So I've had great success really kind of bringing that in and making sure that that's where everything starts. And again, the right people at a certain level that are on that team, that it's very protected, and that you have ad hoc members, be it individuals from the local law enforcement or your psych, or in a hospital. We always had a physician that was either on there or an ad hoc individual. I think that's kind of where that was probably the biggest thing for me. And then really training and really buying into a non-escalation, a preventative type of culture, so that you really get back to treating each other and everyone with dignity, so that you really, obviously you're not going to stop everything, but learning how to ask questions instead of making people defensive, learning how to speak to people and really pushing that out. Again, that's the first thing you do. You start with those things, and it doesn't mean that takes the place of any of your other physical or technology layering.
So, Jerry, when we're talking about crisis response, obviously you got to tailor your plans to the environment. So why should preparedness plans be tailored to specific industries and facility types? And how do you differentiate and go about doing that?
Well, obviously you have to look at local regulations first.
Sure.
When you look at the state of New York, for example, they've just implemented new workplace violence regulations in the taxi industry, in the, believe it or not, the beauty industry. So you have to be mindful of those because you want to meet those standards. But each facility, it's like when we used to do school surveys, they would expect us to survey a school and give them a program for the district. Well, if you've seen one school, if you've seen one commercial facility, you've seen one. You haven't seen them all. And if you've seen one part of a plant or whatever the campus is, that's all you've seen. So without tailoring it to the specific requirements, because a big thing that has to go into it is geography. How far are we from the closest hospital? How far is local law enforcement? What is the average response time should we have a critical incident? But one thing I want to kind of dovetail on what Eric had said about how with the gun detection, when you think about it, you have left of boom, which is nothing's going on, and you have right of boom. Well, if you're utilizing gun detection that's detecting someone on the exterior of the building, you're still in a left of boom condition where you could easily activate additional camera coverage, lockdown, whatever the case may be. And we've seen a number of these shootings that have occurred where had the building just simply been locked down before the armed perpetrator with a visible firearm. Now, they're not always visible, but the ones that are approaching the building with a visible firearm, locking that building down and starting the process of responding to that event is what's really critical. Hopefully I addressed what you were looking for, but just understand
that's perfect.
Each application is different because of geography, because of layout, and it's got to be tailored. But the overarching problem with all of this, or not problem, but things that people are missing, there's so much best practice documentation out there that will get used against you. You mentioned that I'm an NFPA 3000 certified. If you were planning an active shooter strategy and you simply followed the guidelines that are incorporated in NFPA 3000, you have a defensible plan, because you doesn't mean that someone can't come in and shoot somebody, but you can't be held accountable for that if you've used reasonable care to protect against that. You foresaw it, you used reasonable care, but unfortunately the person was still able to do it.
Exactly. At least you did your due diligence.
Right. Just for a second though, think about the Butler shooting. Is there anybody that gets better protection than the President of the United States? The answer to that is probably no. He's in the greatest security cocoon you could be in. Yet a shooter was able to get onto the roof because they had failed to plan for that option.
Eric, when you're looking at the technology we're talking about, especially in your case, you guys use AI. It's a powerful tool, and it definitely helps with the solution you're offering. But at the end of the day, human verification and having that human in the loop, as you said earlier before we got on the air, is important. So why is a human verification still essential when you're using AI-based detection methods, and how do we balance speed with judgment?
I always like to quote IBM when I get asked this question. Once upon a time, they said, a computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision. And this, that statement kind of is the foundational principle of ethical technology use. Even if a computer can analyze data or automate a task, people really need to remain responsible for the decisions that affect people, safety, or your outcomes. Only people can be held accountable. While AI is really good at detecting visual cues like the presence of a firearm, it doesn't have judgment. It doesn't have context. It can't really understand like a trained human can. AI can detect threats, but it can't determine intent. So human in the loop verification, which is what we recommend on all of our implementations, really ensures that we don't delegate the final decision making to a machine alone. We use AI as a fast assistant and a trained human to make the call based on their experience, your policy, and their situational awareness.
Very good. Lisa, when we're talking about policy development and embedding safety in organizational culture, how do policies and leadership commitment influence workplace violence prevention?
I think it number one, it gives a roadmap as to how, what the expectation is. It provides accountability, and not just for the staff, but also accountability for the organization. And it can provide trust if, as long as, it's a fully, a full policy that really talks about why they're doing what they're doing. And these are the reasons that you have to follow certain, policies and procedures for your safety, for safety of the organization. I think that without that, without a roadmap, I think we talk about, there's certain things, for instance, in a library, we know that we're supposed to be quiet. That's the rule. So if there's any acting out, any deviation from that, that's an immediate red flag. If you're going to your religious organization, there's certain things that you do there. When that protocol is not followed, that's an immediate red flag. Same with your workplace. So it's very important that you have your policies or your decorum on what types of behavior that's accepted or not accepted.
Jerry, when we get through an incident and having that post-incident recovery phase that we go through, making sure you got your legal ducks in a row, and the staff and anybody involved in the incident, has that emotional stability to help, post incident, and also making sure their mental health is good. What are the critical post-incident steps organizations must take when you advise folks post-incident?
Well, the key thing, it's called PFA, psychological first aid, is being able to have a conversation. One of the things that I learned many years ago from the Postal Service, when they first started having shooting events in their facilities, they had contracts in the area of every postal facility they had to do cleanup. In other words, no one was allowed back into the building until the building was pristine. So bringing them back into an environment that they feel safe in is really the key. And of course, one of the risks associated. If you have a serious active shooter event or serious workplace violence event, how many people just aren't going to want to come back to work? But if I could just say something about what Lisa had said, I think one of the keys with any workplace violence plan is if upper level management doesn't buy in and doesn't support it, how can you expect anyone else to support it? So it's really something that comes from the very top down. But again, the nature of the incident that occurs is going to dictate how much psychological first aid is required, how much physical plant rebuild is going to be required. Because like the church, I forget, in Texas, where the guy fired so many rounds into the building before he entered, the building was no longer stable. They had to tear the building down because he had just shot it up so badly that it was uninhabitable. So that is a multifaceted approach to try and recover from these events.
Right. Jerry, let's address this. I mean, most of the situations we've been talking about today are institutional, larger institutional environments and corporate environments. But when we're looking at trying to achieve that high level emergency readiness for smaller organizations, how can small organizations that have limited resources, that can be people and budget, still achieve that high level of emergency readiness that larger organizations enjoy?
Well, the great thing is they don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can find through, let's say it's a small school district, through REMS or through PASS, there's plenty of free documentation on how to get started, whether it's the physical layout of the building or how to write an emergency operations plan. But when you think that there's actually a statute that says, and it's something that you can be held accountable for, if you have 10 or more employees, you must have a written emergency action plan. If you have 10 or less, You must still have the plan. It just doesn't have to be in writing. But developing a plan where you have a conversation about the what ifs and then the if thens. With the, oh, it can't happen here. Well, then we're not even considering what could happen. So a comprehensive threat assessment for any type of building, which can be easily done. You can obviously call a professional in to do it, but there's all types of resources from FEMA, for example. They have an amazing, it's called THIRA SPR, where if you're looking to develop a risk assessment or a threat assessment for your facility, step by step how to do it. If after you've done that, you want to run a drill or an exercise, well, they have HESPA, which is the Homeland Security Exercise Evaluation Plan. So there's all types of documents that can be found. To try and give you that actual layout in less than a day would be impossible. But the data is available, and the data becomes the paper tiger because it doesn't cost anything to get it. It requires some research and then the development of an internal plan. But you have to have a plan. What if you had a, put active shooter workplace violence aside? What if you had a tornado? What if you had a severe thunderstorm? What's your continuity of operations plan? How are you going to continue to operate after that event has occurred?
Right. Eric, I wanted you to jump in on this question as well, because, every organization is not going to have a GSOC or a SOC. They're not going to have a security team. In fact, less than 50% of most organizations even have security personnel, that are designated at an executive position. So, from your perspective, how can the new technologies empower small organizations, small businesses to respond like much larger ones?
I don't think it's just small organizations. I think it's small administrative organizations that are looking to protect or be responsible for large populations as well. I think schools fall into this, whether it's a private university, whether it's a K through 12 organization. You're talking about a small core group of responsible people that are responsible for a large organization or a large footprint. And I don't want to say that technology is the only answer, but it's certainly a piece of the puzzle. And the truth is, you really don't need a massive budget or a full-time SOC to be ready. The smart, scalable technologies available today, like visual gun detection, like mobile-first mass notification, like automated access control, they really allow small teams to operate with the speed and the coordination of much larger organizations. A single staff member has the ability to receive verified gun detection. They can trigger an alert from wherever they are. They can lock doors at the press of a button. First responders can be notified immediately, within seconds often, by utilizing things like automated workflows, real-time alerts. It means you're not starting from scratch when a crisis hits. Planning is the key word, as we've all said a number of times. Having a plan and being able to execute it in real time is really what it's all about. It's not about having more people. It's about empowering the limited number of people that you do have with the right tools to act quickly and, as importantly, confidently when it's needed most.
Technology should be a force multiplier for everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lisa, you want to jump in?
Yeah, one thing that I've found to be really, really helpful and have had a lot of success is actually implementing cross-functional daily huddles. Many places have those anyway, and you use a scenario, a quick scenario. You start building that muscle memory, and even asking the question, what could go wrong today? What's one thing that could go wrong today? Let's talk it through. Doesn't cost anything, but it really starts building that muscle memory, and even some of your staff don't even realize that you have certain types of technology, but that's a perfect way to do it on a daily basis or a weekly basis.
Yeah. Jerry and Lisa, let me throw this out to you. And I'm going to go to our Q&A. We got some great questions, so I want to leave some time for that. So we've got Dennis is asking the question. He's with a Catholic parish and school, and he wants to know what type of prevention applies to church environments where everybody is welcome, and that's the open environment conundrum that these buildings have. So, Jerry, you want to start off with that, and then Lisa?
Well, any place where people gather, you have the risk of a workplace violence or active shooter event. The protocols that we're starting to see in more and more churches is, number one, armed security at the church. There was just a shooting this past weekend where armed parishioners actually mitigated the threat, neutralized the threat. Again, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but there is amazing information available from both the FBI and CISA on how to properly protect a church, whether it's external video. But in today's world, you know, the saddest thing is churches actually make up a measurable percentage of the pie of where active shooter events occur, which is just heartbreaking to think that the place where, you know, whatever your religion is, you go to feel safe. But, you know, we live in an environment or a society where you're not safe everywhere, and everywhere has to take precautions. It comes back to what Eric said. It can't happen here. Well, that's the wrong way to address it. The huddle that Lisa talked about. You will never rise to the occasion in any major event. You will fall to your level of training. And if you train till you get it right, under stress, you'll fail. You have to train until you can't get it wrong. And every time you do a huddle, you're reinforcing that knowledge. You're bringing that folder to the front of the forehead saying, okay, well, if this was to happen, this is what I do, but you have to do it without making people paranoid. But from the standpoint of churches, you have to take the same precautions you would in a commercial environment, in an educational environment, and there's good documentation out there on how to do that.
Lisa, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think the way that, in no way am I saying that what Eric and Jerry have said, that I do not dismiss that. That is absolutely do every single one of those things. But also the thing that we can't leave out is really teaching and making sure that we're treating everyone with dignity and respect. How are we talking to everyone? Are we pushing the envelope? And in hospitals, we have a tendency to get really, especially in the emergency department, everything's moving at a rapid pace. And sometimes that high touch is not part of how they deal with individuals. And you end up kind of, you know, pushing the envelope when that shouldn't happen. So absolutely make sure you've got those layers in, but from a place where everyone comes in, you've got to make sure that you're speaking to everyone with respect and dignity, even when, you know, that you never take anything personal, even when they say things to you that are not appropriate. It's not your personal face that you let be seen.
Well, Lisa, let me just segue this question. We just had a question come in from someone at MD Anderson in Houston. How do you effectively navigate and de-escalate situations, especially in Texas, where individuals push back against hospital no firearm policies, especially when they cite state laws or personal rights as justification for bringing guns into a healthcare environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's almost, by the time you get to that point where you're having that one-on-one, it's already kind of, we've lost that battle. I think you arm yourself with great information, and it's how you speak to those individuals. You don't argue the point. You give them choices. You make sure that you're safe. Whoever, if this is security or police, this conversation needs to be, you know, conducted in a very safe manner, in a safe location. So I don't have an absolute answer. Been there, done that. But I do know that by incorporating some of these methods of speaking to people in a very dignified and respectful manner, you know, please take this back to your vehicle. We're doing this for you. There's certain ways to say this.
Sure.
You know.
All right. Well, we're going to finish this off with a question to Eric, and you're going to be our last guy. We had some great questions here. So this is another question from somebody named Phil. What are the suggestions, or what are any suggestions or advice that you might have for engaging local law enforcement when adopting a proactive stance?
I mean, I think the suggestion is do. Definitely do. I think in every situation that I've come across, whether it's high-level discussions about technology like ours, whether it's implementing, whether it's testing on site, anytime we reach out to local law enforcement to be involved, they jump at the chance. And it's not just so that they can play with fancy technology. It's
Sure.
because they have a vested interest in helping you to keep yourself safe, because that helps them to do their job.
Right.
If if we can get them involved in the deployment phase, they can make recommendations. If we can get them involved at the in the planning stages, we can put more effective communication methods in place. By being able to engage with them quicker, faster, and better, they can respond quicker, faster, and better. And I think that anything that improves, that speeds that up, improves your chance of mitigating or even preventing in the first place.
Perfect answer. Hey, this has been a great hour. I really appreciate it. We had a very engaged audience. I know we could have gone probably another hour on this topic. We've got three really fine experts here. So I want to thank everybody that attended today. I want to thank Lisa, Jerry, and Eric for sharing their insights on this subject. And of course, I want to thank Eric and Omnilert for gracing our panel today. And we love to invite you back for some future events because you've got some great insights. So just as a reminder, following today's presentation, the webinar will be archived on our site for 6 months, and you will receive an email notification once that's occurred. To access more webinars, you can go to SecurityInfoWatch.com/webinars. So again, for Lisa, for Jerry, and for Eric, thank you very much, and appreciate all the attendance, and everybody looking forward to the weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you on our next broadcast.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.